Hello and welcome back to GCSE Religious Studies. We're going to continue talking about Christian practices, focusing specifically on the idea of pilgrimage in this lesson. So, as an introduction, if this loads, there we go. In this lesson, we're going to examine the nature of pilgrimage for Christians and the importance of the practice. So we're going to explain what it is, and then we're going to examine the importance of it. And then after that, we will look at different places of pilgrimage that have been documented in both history and that exist to this very day. Now, we're going to use two major examples, but of course, there are plenty of examples that you can examine from textbooks as well as just online. And a little bit of an extra bit of work for you to do is to look for other examples of pilgrimage from around the world to really solidify your knowledge on this topic. So, the first question that we should really ask is, what is pilgrimage? What do we mean when we talk about pilgrimage? Well, an act of pilgrimage is a journey that a Christian will go on as a way to spend time and focus on the appreciation of God. That's what an act of pilgrimage essentially is in its broadest characterization. The act itself will often involve a physical journey to some specific location. This location will then have a significant amount of religious meaning, or will be historically a place of worship for Christian people, historically for Christians. So this is what the journey of pilgrimage is. It involves the journey to a specific place, and the specific place having a certain degree of religious meaning. And there are very broad ways in which we describe a place or location of significant religious meaning. In some instances, we talk about places that are of great healing, that maybe perform miracles in certain places. In other places, we have ideas where they are just a significant place of worship, where a lot of people will go to worship God. And in other instances, they are historically just very religiously significant. And we'll use two examples in this lesson. One will be of a place of worship that is of religious significance, and then there is going to be one that is specifically relating to a miracle that is alleged to have happened in that place. The belief in pilgrimage relates to this desire to feel closer to God, and the belief that in order to feel closer to God, you can go through a particularly arduous journey, a particularly difficult process, and that makes them feel the need for God. So the idea of pilgrimage in its most purest form is an idea that relates to the fact that this journey that is going to be had by Christian people to this particular religious place is one that's going to be difficult. It's going to be a difficult journey. It's an arduous journey that allows for a closer connection with God through the suffering that is done on this journey. If the pilgrimage takes place to a place of religious significance, then it can also have the effect of being a very spiritual journey, and it can have a very interesting spiritual outcome in the fact that you're going to a place where potentially miracles have happened, and so you might feel that there is a certain sense of spirituality in that location as well. So there's a lot of different factors that has to be considered when talking about pilgrimage. There is also the belief that pilgrimage can cause God to reveal himself to you as well. So some people go on pilgrimage as a way to derive a certain amount of revelation, to be able to have God reveal himself to you. And so therefore you go on pilgrimage for that particular reason as well. So let's think about some examples of locations. I just noticed there are actually not two that we're going to go through. We're going to actually go through three examples. And the first of these examples is Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem is one of the most holy places in the world, and this is holy because not only because of the Christian significance, but also the significance that exists from other Abrahamic religions as well. So this is where Jesus lived in the later part of his life, and this is also where Jesus dies. And as such, many Christians will go on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, often doing so around the time of Easter, which is of course the time when we celebrate and we think about the sacrifice of Jesus and the crucifixion of Jesus. And many Christians will go on this journey of pilgrimage as a way to personally, in some instances, replicate the journey that Jesus had to go through during the crucifixion, without actually having to go and crucify yourself in real life. So you see here that this really does tie into this idea that we looked at in the last slide, where pilgrimage relates to this idea of a journey being quite arduous. The idea that if we put ourselves into the shoes of somebody who suffered through the process of religious and spiritual significance, like the story of Jesus and his crucifixion, then we can have a closer relationship with God, we can have a certain amount of spiritual revelation, and we could even, in some instances, have an actual physical revelation of God as well. So, for example, in terms of the practical aspects and the ways in which this operates in Jerusalem, on Good Friday in Jerusalem, many Christians will take the walk along what is known as the Way of Sorrows. And this is the route that historians and theologians believe was the route that Jesus took. So the reason why I'm including historians in that is because it seems to be the case that most historians studying this period have an idea that Jesus, A, existed in some meaningful sense, and B, was crucified, because just the way in which we understand the historical Jesus now, that is far beyond the scope of GCSE. It's probably beyond the scope of A-level as well. If anyone goes and studies theology or philosophy or history at university, you might have the opportunity to study the idea of the historical Jesus. There's not that much evidence, historical hard evidence, for the existence of Jesus, but there is enough for some historians to come to the conclusion that Jesus lived around this time, and that certain instances and certain things happened, like, for example, the crucifixion. They will also visit the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This is the worst pronunciation I've ever had to do. Okay, so they will go and visit this holy church that I'm not going to try and pronounce again. The reason for this is because this particular church is a shrine that was built on the spot where where it's believed Jesus' tomb actually existed. So 10 points if you can actually tell me how to pronounce said church for a start. But the important significance of this in relation to Jerusalem is, of course, the fact that we are going to a place where it is believed Jesus' tomb existed. So we're going to first walk the path that it is believed that Christ had to walk along when he was crucified, and then we go to the shrine where it is believed that Jesus' tomb had existed. Now, within this church, there is also the stone of unction, or unton, and this is the stone upon which Jesus' body is believed to have been laid and washed after the crucifixion. Again, all of these different things having a number of very significant religious meanings to a number of different Christians around the world, because it is replicating both the journey that Jesus took, the place where Jesus would lay rest, and also the place where Jesus' body was laid when he, or at least after he was crucified. And so that's the first of the major places of pilgrimage that Christians will go to. The second is the Vatican. Now, the Vatican, or Vatican City, is a country, it's an enclave state in Italy, and it is the central focal point for the Catholic religion. It's a very beautiful place. I've not been there myself, but from what I've seen of the Vatican, it is very, very beautiful. It's a very small country. It's the smallest country in the world, and in fact, it's actually, to be fair, the Vatican City itself as a country, if you're somebody who's into their geography, it's very interesting how it was established in the 1920s in Italy, and the way it sort of operates to this day and all this kind of stuff. Very interesting. But in terms of religious significance, there's a number of different aspects of it. So within the Vatican is the Church of St. Peter. This is the largest Christian church in the world, and St. Peter was also one of the most important characters in the early Christian history. Again, some of this may be beyond the scope of GCSE, and probably even beyond the scope of A-level in some instances, because church history, again, is also very interesting, is very complicated, and relates to a number of different aspects of the development of religious doctrine that came out after all of these events are said to have taken place. According to the story, St. Peter was fleeing persecution in Rome, and then when he was fleeing, he had a vision from Jesus who convinces him that he should not flee persecution. Instead, Peter returns to Rome and demands to be crucified upside down as an act of martyrdom in the name of Jesus. So we have here a very interesting case where we again have a certain amount of suffering in the case of St. Peter. We have a very religious significance in terms of the spiritual meaning of this particular story, the idea that Jesus is giving a vision to St. Peter, convincing him not to flee the persecution and to represent Christianity in the way that he believes it ought to be represented. And then we also have the suffering that goes alongside all of these different types of locations for pilgrimage. You have the crucifixion with Jesus, and you have the upside down crucifixion with St. Peter as a martyr for Christ and Christianity. Finally, we have a location known as Lourdes. Now, Lourdes is a location in France where the story goes, and it's a very modern story compared to the rest of Christian history, that in 1858, a 14-year-old girl called Bernadette Subaros is believed to have had a number of visions from God. So a miracle is alleged to have taken place in this particular region. Now, following these visions, a water spring would appear, and it will still exist to this day. Now, the belief in Lourdes is that this water spring has miracle healing powers. So you could probably understand, A, why there is a certain amount of religious significance, because it is believed that a miracle has taken place. Visions from God came to this 14-year-old girl. But then we also have the miracle of the healing waters that exist. So as a result, a church was built on the location and is now a place of pilgrimage for many Christians to locate. Now, according to the Catholic Church, which is that reports a number of these different instances, there have been allegedly 7,000, well, there have been actually 7,000 reported healings, over 60 of which have been confirmed to be miracles by the church. Now, again, if you're somebody who is agnostic or atheist, you would probably look at this with suspicion, but look at it through the lens of a Catholic, you would come to the conclusion that there have been at least 60 miracles that have been confirmed to have taken place at Lourdes in France. But of course, with there being over 7,000 reported healings, it could be the case that that number is much higher. So at least if you're somebody who believes in Christianity and is very spiritual and is a Catholic, you would come to the conclusion that this is a very, very religious, very spiritual, and very important place for Christianity. And you can understand why people would take pilgrimage and go to this location. So these are the three locations that we have examined in this lesson. We've talked about Jerusalem, we've talked about the Vatican, and we've talked about Lourdes. Now, there are instances where these are different. These are in some instances different types of locations of pilgrimage. The first instance is one where we are actually directly tracing the steps of the Christian story in the crucifixion of Christ. In the second instance, we're talking about first of all, a place of incredible religious significance, seeing as it is essentially Catholicism HQ in the Vatican. And this is where, obviously, we also have stories such as that of St. Peter. But then there are also locations of pilgrimage that relate to miracles that are alleged to have taken place without history. And there are this example here of Lourdes. So a little task for you to do if you're in any free time is to look at any more examples of pilgrimage. Look at other locations where pilgrimage is often partaken by other Christians, and see what kind of places you can come up with. See what the most obscure location is that you can find that is said to be a place of pilgrimage for many Christians.